best Western outfit I have. And speaking of best Western, let's read you guys some myths and get you to sleep. So go, turn that AC down, brush your teeth, get ready for bed, do what you gotta do, and let me help you zone out to go to sleep. So let's check this book out. It is part of the World Mythology series, and it's called Spirits, Heroes, and Hunters from North American Indian Myth. Collected here in one volume is a selection of fascinating tales from the many religions and cultures of the North American Indians. And I flipped through this book and it's pretty fun. I like it. It gives a lot of depth to the Native American culture, and especially in the framework of understanding that these stories are who knows how many thousands of years old. They really are. 10, 20,000, who knows, maybe they have analogs in ancient China and Japan and India. The cultures which I'm sure they shared an ancestry with at some point before crossing the Bering Strait, the Bering Land Bridge. Is that what it was called? So we have 26 stories from a wide selection of major tribes. The 18 large, full-color paintings, 42 line drawings, and a full-color map. Full-color map. And an index to the people and places in the stories, as well as a guide to symbols and the illustrations. Trying to give you the best view, non-reflective view. I suppose that's as good as it gets. You can see a beautiful environment, a beautiful context. You have some big birds flying in the foreground, and these massive, gargantuan, ancient geological pillars with the sun setting right between them. And some, looks like some tents, teepees in the mid-ground, mid to foreground. It's beautiful. And in the front we have looks like a Indian chief, or more like a shaman. He appears to be pretty, there we go, pretty mystical. And right before we open up this book, I just want to give a special shout out to who gave me this great suggestion. I know there is more than one of you who have suggested I do a Native American mythology or history book, series, video, episode. Take your pick. But in particular, this one is, I want to give a shout out to Julian Bracco, man. thank you for the great suggestion. And I'm gonna go ahead and switch the view, but before I did, I'm gonna do one of my famous seamless transitions. We have a beautiful, beautiful bunch of line drawings right here, I think. I like this one the most. We have something from Eskimo lore. Kind of an amalgam of multiple creatures. Predatory creatures like claws of a cat, tail of a snake. Kind of a reptilian skin. And then the sight of a bird, maybe a bird, that's what they're worshipping there. Then here we have much, much more of a snake, alligator, lizard combination. We have this rabbit looking really loony, like a Looney Tune. And a symbolic bear. Brilliant. Of course, this book was made in 1981. 1981, so that will give you a clue to some of its cultural, how do I put that, insensitivity perhaps. And now Julian was talking about the Iroquois, and you can see here they're mostly around Delaware with the Delaware natives, I suppose. And I didn't realize that so many of the natives were wiped out by different European diseases when Columbus initially came over here, that many of the settlers actually didn't really need to even worry about any conflict, because the numbers of natives were so vastly, so decreased, that they simply didn't have many numbers to fight them. So perhaps if the disease hadn't have destroyed so many lives of the natives, America wouldn't be the European-centric nation it is today. And perhaps it would be very much more the presence of Native American culture would be a lot more infused, and perhaps the dominant culture over here. So anyways, I actually already recorded a video discussing all these different, this nice little introductory glossary of the lives and a very, very condensed history of many of the different tribes from North America and the Arctic all the way down south to the Rio Grande Southwest, the Navajo and the Hopi and the Apaches. So go to the tale I want to do. There really are some very, very cool drawings and paintings. Very, very, I don't know, just very highly detailed. I think they'd be really cool to have and put up in my room, actually. So let's find, and there's the cover art. Tell you what, let's go to the index. Look up the Iroquois. So the Iroquois are on 68 and 73 to 76. Looking for 68. Wonder what that is. Okay, so this one is, that's a library book. What are you gonna do? This one is called The Big Turtle. The big turtle. The big turtle. So the Indians of the eastern woodlands accorded considerable respect to the spirits of the plants which they grew in the fields or gathered in the surrounding countryside. The most important of these were the three sisters who brought corn, beans, and squash in numerous festivals. Numerous festivals were held to celebrate the planting, the ripening, and the harvesting of these crops. For many of the tribes, the gathering of the first corn in summer marked the start of the new year. It was a time for dancing and games, and for ceremonies and thanksgiving for the harvest. It was also a time for fasting, cleansing, and new beginnings. New beginnings. Houses were swept clean, fires extinguished, and the old dishes and utensils thrown away in favor of new ones. Debts were settled, quarrels resolved, and misdeeds forgiven. Other ceremonies were held to invoke the help of the spirits and to drive away the harmful forces. These were often conducted by secret societies. One of these being the Iroquois False Face Society, whose members wore grotesque wooden masks and carried turtle shell rattles. The masks represented the faces, horrible bodiless heads, which spread disease by adopting the appearance of the faces and by performing special songs and dances. The members of the False Face Society hoped to attain supernatural power to aid them in the curing illness and defending of the community against misfortune. There were other evil demons besides the faces. Dwarves lurking in the caves or in hollow trees took delight in leading travelers astray or luring them into swamps. Forests
were inhabited by fierce monsters, like the Nokos Oma, a bear-like creature with long, sharp tusks, and horned serpents infested lakes and the rivers. The Niagara Falls were said to have been formed by the huge body of one such serpent, lying coiled under the water. The sky was generally regarded as the home of powerful spirits who controlled the earth and who could be called upon to help and protect people.
The name given to the ruler of the Skyland varied from tribe to tribe. The Creek Indians called him Hisikita Imisi. Hisikita Imisi, the preserver of breath, or Ibovanga, the one above us.
The Chickasaw linked their chief spirit with the sun and called him Luak Ishto Olaba, the great sacred fire above. Many of the tribes believed that the souls of those who had led good lives went to the Skyland along the Milky Way, which they called the Spirit Path, or sometimes the Dog's Trail, because of the legend that it had been formed by a dog dragging a sack of flour which spilled along the way. The souls of the wicked remained below in the dark and gloomy regions of the West, inhabited by witches and demons. The myths concerning the creatures and creation of the world are very similar throughout the eastern woodlands. It is said that in the beginning the first people lived in the sky, for the earth was covered by water and inhabited
only by swimming birds and animals. It was not until an animal, or sometimes a bird, or an insect, dived into the water in search of soil that the earth came to be formed.
The world was usually thought as a flat plain enclosed on all sides by a great dome of the sky, which, of course, does make sense if you are in the pre-scientific world without proper tools for measuring the curvature of the earth, or the mindset. Initially, what it appears to be is indeed a flat plain, and it would be a disk, because you can see equally from the mountaintop in all directions. And it would of course be a dome, because you see at the horizon is where the dome meets the disk.
And of course you would think that there's nothing but water outside it, because at the corners and the ends of every land there lies an immense, endless ocean of water. And if you dig deep enough, what do you find? Very often you find water, great fresh, life-giving water reservoirs. And where does the rain come from? It trickles down from the sky onto the dry soil in which the roots of the plants spread to find more water.
So the Cherokee, however, saw it as a floating island suspended from the sky by 4 cords. When the world grows old, the story goes, the cords will break and the earth will sink back into the ocean,
and all will be covered by water once more.
regarded by most as master in chief of all the animals.
And there are several myths explaining how he came to hold this high position.
One, for example, explains the important part that he played in the creation of the world. In the days when water still covered the earth, one of the sky people, a young woman fell ill. The shaman, in spite of all his wisdom and knowledge of healing, could do nothing to make her well, and at last he said,
"There is only one more remedy to try. I have heard that the roots of the wild apple tree contain a powerful medicine. If that can be found, it may help to cure her."
So the girl's father and brothers carried her to the place in the skyland where the wild apple tree grew and laid her down by the roots, so that if the medicine were found, it could be given to her without delay. They began to scrape away the earth, and around the tree they laid her down. They worked until their arms ached, and they had made a great hole around the tree. But there was no medicine to be seen, and they dug deeper and deeper until nearly all the roots were exposed. But still, they found nothing. Tired and dejected, they climbed out of the hole they had dug and sat on the edge, just for a moment to rest. Suddenly, with a rumbling like thunder, the edges of the hole began to collapse. The men sprang back in alarm, and even as they did so, the tree began to slip down through the earth.
The girl, too weak and too ill to save herself, tumbled down into the hole together with the tree and disappeared from sight.
Far below, on the water which covered the earth, 2 swans were swimming, startled by the roll of thunder, the first ever heard in the world. They looked up and saw the tree and the woman falling from the sky. Fearing that she might drown in the water, the swans quickly drew together and caught her on their smooth white backs. The wild apple tree splashed into the water beside them and sank without a trace. So the swans bent their long, graceful necks and gazed at their burden in wonder.
"What are we to do now?" asked one. "We cannot always swim like this, and already she is growing heavy."
"We had better call a council," said his companion, "and see what the other animals can suggest." All the birds and animals that lived in the water assembled for the council. Big Turtle presided, and for a long time they debated the matter, but without coming to a satisfactory conclusion.
"We must think of something,"
said the Big Turtle impatiently.
"I am certain that the woman has been sent to us for our own good, but the swans cannot support her forever, and it is unthinkable that
The animals were all very concerned, and they tried hard to think of a plan. At last the otter said,
"What about that tree that fell with the woman? Perhaps there is earth still clinging to its roots. If we could find some of that, we could build an island for her to live on."
"An excellent idea, excellent idea," cried the turtle. "If we can indeed make an island this way, I will support it on my back." Otter, who is acknowledged as the best swimmer, offered to go first and plunged into the depths. He was gone for a very, very long time. The waiting animals began to grow anxious, though. But finally, they saw him coming back through the clear water. Otter broke the surface of the water, coughing and wheezing. But to everyone's disappointment, he had found no trace of the tree in spite of all his searching.
All around the land, from right to left, and back again.
Next, Beaver went down. Beaver went down, then Muskrat, then all the other diving animals. Each was gone as long as the otter, some even longer. But
when they returned, gasping and half dead from exhaustion, all of them had to admit defeat.
None of them had brought anything back. So it seemed as if the plan was doomed to failure. Big Turtle looked around him in despair, and there were no more animals to send. Suddenly a voice popped up. "Let me go. Let me try to find some earth." It was Tosquay the Toad. Tosquay the Toad was so small and insignificant that no one had even realized she was there. The other animals gaped at her, and in astonishment, some began to titter, amused by the presumption of the little creature. The Big Turtle quieted them and said to the Toad, "Very well then, go."
"If you think you can do better than Otter or Beaver."
So Toad took a big gulp of air and sank down below the surface of the water. The animals gathered close together and gazed at the spot where she had vanished. They did not really expect to see her again, yet still they watched. They waited. They waited for such a long time that they began to whisper to each other that it might be over, all over for Toad, Tosquay the Toad. And suddenly an air bubble came up through the water and burst on the surface. Then more bubbles appeared, to be followed at last by the small, ugly-faced Toad. She opened her mouth, and with her last breath spat out a few grains of earth onto the edge of the Big Turtle's shell.
And they rained down, making clitter-clatter all around. As all the grains of sand rubbed together and fell onto the shell, multiplying and growing as the turtle had promised.
After spitting out those grains of sand and watching them tumble down onto the turtle's back, at last, Taskway the toad fell back dead. At once the animals began rubbing and spreading the earth around the big turtle's shell. As they did so, the earth grew and grew until it became a large island, large enough for the woman to live on. The swans carried the woman to it, and she stepped ashore. Still the earth continued to grow and spread until it became the world as we know it. The Indians say that the world still rests upon the big shell of a big turtle. Sometimes when he becomes tired, he moves his feet or changes his position in the world is shaken by earthquakes. As for the toad, who gave her life to fetch earth from the roots of the wild apple tree, she is not forgotten by the Eastern Indians. They call her Mashataha, which means our grandmother, and no one is allowed to harm her. Another story ascribes the turtle's supremacy to his bravery and cunning, and tells of a time after the world was formed, but while still only a very few people inhabited it. One of these people was an old man called Kaehe, who lived with his young nephew. Each day the young man went in search of food, and on his return his uncle would ask him what he had done, what he had seen, what he had found. Sometimes the young man brought back berries and nuts, sometimes nothing at all. For then the animals were not so easily caught, nor had men learned to make weapons with which to hunt them. One evening when the young man returned, his uncle asked, as usual, "Well, nephew, what did you see today, and what have you brought?" The young man replied, "I found the eagle asleep in a tree. I crept up on him and tried to catch him, but he was too quick for me. Nevertheless, I managed to pull out one of his tail feathers. Look," and he held up a large, glossy feather. Kaehe was horrified, for Eagle was the chief of all birds, haughty and proud, very proud, and one who would not easily brook such an insult. Kaehe was still horrified. "What have you done, you stupid boy?" he cried, wringing his hands. "You have put us in a very, very tight spot, in very grave danger." The old man rushed to the door of the lodge and looked up at the sky. In the distance, he saw Eagle winging his way swiftly towards him. He ran back inside and shouted to his nephew, "Make haste, hang the feather up in the smoke hole. Perhaps when the eagle sees it there, he will take it away without causing any trouble. Trembling, they crouched in a corner of the lodge. They heard the wing belts and beats come closer, until at last they knew the eagle must be hovering directly over the smoke hole. There was a long, terrible silence, and they scarcely dared to breathe. All that could be heard was the beating of the wings.
the smoke hole.
Then they heard the eagle fly away.
The eagle flew away, and they looked up, but the feather still hung in the smoke hole.
The young man sighed with relief and said, "He has gone away without taking this feather. We are safe." But his uncle groaned. "No, this makes it all the worse, for he means to punish us.
The danger is now even greater, and we must call a council."
Not all the animals were invited to the council. The strong and powerful animals like the bear and the wolf and the fleet-footed like deer were turned away, for Kaehe told them, "You have no need to fear Eagle. Only those who, like ourselves, are weak and slow. Only those like ourselves who are weak and slow are in danger." Thus it was the creatures who had the most to fear, like otter, skunk, porcupine, and turtle, who formed the council. Kaehe told them what had happened and warned them that the eagle would return for his revenge by bringing friends, hawk and owl, and all the other birds of prey. In fact, each of the council members described what they would
do to defend themselves when the attack came.
Kaehe's nephew said, "I will throw stones at them and drive them off." Skunk said, "I will spray my scent at them and tear out their eyes." Porcupine said, "I will run my quills through them if they come near me." Only Turtle said nothing.
Turtle said nothing.
He just sat down and looked about him, blinking sleepily as turtles do. While they were discussing their courses of action, Eagle and his friends appeared in the sky overhead. Immediately, everyone forgot his brave resolve and fled towards a tall tree growing nearby, each scrambling over the other in haste to reach the uppermost branches. Once more the eagle swooped down on Kaehe's lodge and hovered over the smoke hole. But the feather was no longer there. The animals looked around in surprise and saw that, in the confusion, the turtle had carried it away. They watched the turtle plodding off through the woods with the eagle's feather clamped firmly in his jaws,
and felt very frightened. "We must try to stop him," they gasped. "He will put us all in danger."
Porcupine climbed down from the tree and ran after the turtle.
"Stop, stop," he shouted. "You must return the feather to the eagle."
But the turtle kept on walking. The porcupine was in a great quandary. "Since he will not give back the feather, I had better help him," he thought,
and he clambered onto the turtle's back to try to shield him from the eagle's view.
As they traveled along this way, Porcupine scattered ashes in an attempt to conceal the turtle's tracks. Unfortunately, the ashes had quite the opposite effect,
only serving to make the tracks more conspicuous. So Eagle and his friends had no difficulty at all in following the turtle.
And soon they had caught up with him, and Porcupine, fearing for his own safety, jumped off
and beat a hasty retreat. Seeing that he was surrounded, Turtle tucked the feather inside his shell
and drew in his head and his legs, and the birds began to beat him with sticks. But that, of course, had no effect on Turtle's shell.
So they decided to devise some other means of punishment.
Gathering some dry leaves and twigs, they built a fire and threw Turtle into it. But Turtle pretended that it was all a game to him, and laughed and rolled around in the flames as if he were enjoying himself tremendously.
Eagle, Eagle, Eagle. Eagle was beside himself with rage.
"Since fire does not worry you," he shouted, "we will throw you in the river instead." At this, Turtle pretended to be very, very frightened. "Oh no," he shrieked, "not the river. Do anything else you want, but please, please, please do not throw me into the river." The birds dragged Turtle, struggling wildly and pleading for mercy, down to the river bank and dropped him in the water.
"Take me to the rib, drop me in the water."
Turtle floundered about, howling as if in terror. Then he sank to the bottom
like a stone and lay still.
Eagle and his friends, convinced that they had at last put an end to this troublesome creature, flew away in great, great satisfaction. No sooner had they gone than Turtle swam across the river and hauled himself up onto a log, lying by the opposite bank. He pulled Eagle's feather from his shell, and waving it aloft, shouted, "Keye, Keye," which is the cry of the warrior who had defeated his enemies. The animals, hiding in the tree, heard Turtle's cry of triumph and rushed down to see to the river what it meant. They were aghast to see that the turtle still had possession of the feather.
"We must make him return it," said Otter. "But who will go and take it from him? Porcupine, you go." "Oh, no, 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 not I," snorted the porcupine. "I have put myself in danger enough already. Let Skunk go." "I cannot go," said Skunk indignantly. "I might drown Otter. He's the best swimmer."
Otter was persuaded and swam across the river to where the turtle sat, proudly flourishing the eagle's feather. As Otter climbed onto the log, Turtle dropped into the water and dived underneath. He came up on the other side of the log and bit Otter's dangling tail hard. Otter yelped in pain, and jumping back into the water, swam as fast as he could to the safety of the bank. After this, none of the other animals dared to challenge Turtle, and the eagle feather remained in his possession ever afterwards as a token of his superiority over all other animals and birds. To this day, the Indians claim the turtle cannot be overpowered by anyone.
Thanks to every one of you for watching. You keep this channel alive, and I can't tell you how eternally grateful I am for every single one of you. Thank you. Your support really does mean so much. I hope you sleep well. I hope today was good, but I hope tomorrow you wake up feeling restful and ready, reinvigorated.